Alrighty, gang. Here's to nights that turn into mornings and friends that turn into family. Cheers! Happy birthday
to you! Hello. Welcome to the Friendship IRL podcast. I'm your host, Alex Alexander, and each week we explore what's working and what's not in our friendships, community, and connections. Have you ever wished you could sit down and have a conversation about what is really going on in your friendships? Well, you found your people. Join us as we dive into real-life stories and explore new ways to approach these connections. Together, we're reimagining the rules of friendship. What are your friendship patterns? The ways that you're showing up in your friendships over and over and over again. Your communication style, the vulnerability that you offer and receive, your reactions, the tendencies that you have, the phrases that you say, that when you say them so many times, your friends start to believe that they're truth. Maybe your boundaries. Those can be boundaries that you set or don't. I'm sure there's all sorts of other ways we create patterns in our friendships. I know that a few years ago, I realized that I had a pattern. You see, I used to brag about being the friend that could just drop anything for anyone. Like when something went wrong in somebody's life, like I can just drop everything and do anything they need. I used to say that with pride. Except that pattern created this problem where when I did this repeatedly, I really was betraying myself and my own needs. I was kind of carving this hole with my friends where I just kept trying to show up as Superwoman, and they needed me sometimes, so they would let me, but there was really no way they could give back to me without betraying themselves. And I never, ever reciprocated and asked them for help when I really needed it. I realized this pattern was really impacting my friendships and not in a positive way. I think we all have patterns. It's just whether or not we're willing to take a step back and determine whether they serve our friendships or not. Today's guest is Deb Blum. Deb Blum is the CEO and founder of The Whole Soul Way, a 6-month experience that teaches women 40 plus how to coach themselves through internal limitations. By doing so, they become the author of the second half of their lives. Now, today's episode is full of stories and real-life experiences. Deb shares about her own experiences being bullied as a kid, the impact that it has had on her and her friendships long-term, the friendship patterns this experience created, as she was trying to protect herself, understandably. She even talks about the process of noticing her patterns and how she started to unravel them. Maybe today's episode will give you an opportunity to reflect on some of your friendship patterns that you'd like to unravel. And with that, let's get to today's episode. So as far as our episode today, when you and I first talked, the way you started with me was like, friendship has always been an interesting space for me. I'm like, okay, here we go. You tell me. Can you tell us a little bit about, I don't know, how friendship has felt for you throughout your life?
Well, yes, I've come a long way. I really think that in the friendship space, I felt that every single time that I can think back where I had a challenge or a struggle with a friend, it was always the story I had in my head was that I was being me. I was showing up and just being me. And I was like almost, I don't know, naively and innocently being myself. And then I found out that I did something wrong. And then that person didn't want to be my friend anymore. Or worst case was when I was in 10th grade and I ended up bullied by a group of girls because I was being me. I stood up for myself in a situation, and then that friend with air quotes, did not like that I stood up for myself. And then she got another group of friends who decided that they would gang up on me. And I spent an entire year of being physically bullied in every way that you can imagine. And so the story that I told myself was that I cannot be me. And that women couldn't handle me being my true me. So I need to be who they need me to be. I mean, who I imagined that they needed me to be. So I had to be careful on what I said and be a good listener and check in with myself and make sure that I'm not doing anything that's going to upset them, watch for their signals and their cues.
I was going to say, like, the anticipatory work of that, the work before you even open your mouth of trying to figure out what you think they want is so much work.
Mm-hmm. It's exhausting.
It's exhausting.
Yep.
And I was saying to you before, like, I don't have a memory of being bullied, but I know that this is a really, really, really common problem for everybody out there, especially for women who find themselves in this space where they really don't trust other women.
Yep. You nailed it.
Yeah. And it's such an interesting thing, right? Because all the messages say, like, be you, shine bright. People will love you for who you are. And then obviously when that is not the case, where does that leave you? Like at the time in high school, did you know you were pulling back, or was this just like you went day to day through it and you really didn't know?
It's a good question. I mean, I had a lot of friends too. So I was an unusual bullied person. I definitely was not isolated. I had great friends through it. And to be honest, I really did feel like with them, I was probably a little bit more authentic with them. But it's funny. My mom used to say to me that I lowered myself, which, I mean, that sounds like an awful thing to say, but like she would say, it was like I became friends with people who were safe enough where I felt like I could be myself because, I don't know, maybe at some level I did think that they would tolerate me being all of me or something.
Sorry, I'm just dropping in like right in the middle here because sometimes there is a phrase that is used that just, I mean, it might as well be in neon lights in my brain. Like it just stands out. It stops me in my tracks. And we just have one of those. Deb said, I became friends with people who were safe enough. And I think we all just need to sit with that for a second, because I do think that this happens to a lot of people. Like imagine you walk into a room full of people, right? And you're already a little uncomfortable meeting new people and you don't want to draw too much attention. And you notice some other people kind of sitting over on the side at a table doing a puzzle quietly. And I'm not saying everyone is maybe drawn to the people telling jokes and laughing really loudly in the kitchen. Maybe you truly are drawn to the table and the puzzle. But I also think that sometimes we are drawn to the people in the kitchen. I'm just using that as an example. It could be the people who are talking really passionately about art or history or politics, or who are in a lively debate, whatever it is. But we're just like nervous to admit we are that person. And so we go sit at the table, and those people are perfectly lovely people. But if you're sitting at that table wishing the entire time that you were up and in the kitchen having a lively conversation, but then you're befriending the people doing the puzzles and you're mad at them, just something for us all to reflect on, I think. Like I said, this one really stopped me in my tracks.
I don't think it was a conscious process. I don't remember it being a conscious and intentional process. I don't think I said to myself, I need to be careful and I need to change the way that I am. And I wasn't always this way. Like it wasn't with every single person. And when I was in the workplace, because I had a purpose and we talked about work things, I was very honest, upfront, and frank. I could speak and communicate really well. And I felt like I was really my true self. But that was because I was doing something that it was easy for me to be that way in that space. But when it came to things, I also in some ways feel like I'm a little bit, I know now that it's not true, but I felt different. I wasn't into the same things that other people were into. I wasn't really into fashion, and I wasn't into, well, I guess I was into makeup, like bright, colorful, eyeshadow, but I didn't think I had the same interests as other people. I thought I was an oddball. And so because of that, I think I automatically put myself into that category of like, I'm different, which I hear from almost every woman is that they think they're different. And so when I was in the workplace, we had this commonality, and I was valued for my intelligence and my ideas and the things that I did. Nobody cared about my fashion. Nobody cared about those other pieces. Nobody cared about, whether I liked gossip or didn't like gossip. Those things didn't matter. We just worked. So I feel like it wasn't a problem pervasively. It got increasingly worse though. That's the thing for me. It got worse. And as I got older, I felt like I noticed it even more. Like when I was trying to make new friendships and I was trying to fit in. And that is the operative word though. So you said something before, and I just want to speak to this idea that like, where does it leave you? Where does it leave you to think this? The thing is that there is a difference. And I know I'm probably saying something that seems obvious, but there's a difference between fitting in and belonging. And unbeknownst to me, I was trying to fit in. So I was trying to become who I needed to be in order to fit into this crowd that probably weren't really my people. And so the difference, I think, is that when you're looking at belonging, you be you and you be your true you, and then you see where you belong. And if someone doesn't really like you, you realize that it's not personal. That's just part of being human beings. It's not everybody is going to jive with everybody. People are going to have different people that they like. And that's a hard thing for us as people who want to be connected and want to be liked and we don't like that feeling. We don't like the feeling of someone not wanting to be our friend.
Yeah, we do not at all. I haven't talked a ton about fitting in versus belonging on the podcast. I talk about this with people off the microphone all the time. I mean, I think there's such a strong sense of like belonging. Well, it comes from other people. Also comes from trusting yourself, knowing who you are, being okay with who you are, not looking outwardly as much to others for validation, trusting that your interests are okay and other people also share those, but not everyone does, and that's fine, and you can move on. In all the conversations I have with people tell me all the time that like friendship wasn't necessarily modeled. So when you're talking to me about being a 10th grader and struggling with the fit in versus belonging, like I think belonging is modeled and discussed and developed over time. I don't think it's something we just innately have. And if that's not developed, then you get really focused on fitting in, especially when you see people who do have a sense of belonging. You're like, how do I get that? And then I think you try and fit in.
So there are a couple things on that. One thing is I think this sense of belonging, what you're talking about is like you need to belong to yourself first. And that's what I really believe. And I believe when we belong to ourselves and we do become our own best friend and we connect internally to ourselves, it does cultivate enough safety internally to be able to risk, being yourself in the world. And when you talk about like shining your light and like showing up being you, it's so true. It's what we all want. It's what we long for, is to be able to show up, but we want to be also met and be received. And we often put that onto another person before we do it for ourselves first. We need to meet and receive ourselves first.
But I think that when we do that, when we like do that inner reflection and that work and have some sense of who we are and what our interests are and whatever, I think what happens is then when you go through the world, instead of looking at the people you meet and being like, what do they want me to be?
Yes.
I think you walk out with some sense of, I like reading. I'm looking for other people who like reading. So you kind of like have a filter for which to find the people you want to surround yourself with, versus when you don't have that, you're just walking up to people and being like, oh, well, they like clothes, so I should like clothes. But I don't really like clothes.
Yeah.
Again, alternatively, when you have some sense, you meet these people and you're like, I like reading, I like hiking, I like illustrations, whatever you like, drawing, like, you know, these things, and you meet someone, and when you realize they have no overlap, you can kind of just be like, oh, well, it's nice that you like those things, but I don't like any of those things. And then you can keep moving through to find people. Like, I think it's easier to find people that way.
Yeah. Well, and to that point, I think you'll also possibly go to places like you might join a book club, or you might go to the local art studio and do something. And so you naturally put yourself in those places where you'll find them. And then you start to see, well, now where do we overlap in new ways, in deeper ways, right? Because that's just one level of connection. We have so much more available to us with connection when we are authentic and we are open to being impacted by another person too. Like, for example, I might go to a book club, meet somebody there, and then they say to me, hey, you know, I'm going to this illustration class. And I'm like, ooh, I'm insecure about that. That's not something I'm comfortable with. And they're like, well, I'd love for you to come along with me. And then we are willing to take the emotional risk of being vulnerable and not knowing something and being with a friend who knows. And then we start to open up this new level of connection to be able to not only do something when we're insecure in the midst of a person who's more confident in what they're doing, but then also to, I would hope, be able to have the type of relationship where I can then say how I felt about it honestly and allow that to be true and real for me, even when it's not true and real for them. So there's a depth that I think we can get to when we're willing to be, not just do the things we like, but be who we are and be with people who want us to be who we are, where I want you to be who you are and you want me to be who I am. And if it even means we have to part ways, I would rather know who you are as deeply as you'll allow me to, and then make that decision together, than to not know you because you've chosen to only show me some parts of you. And then I'm never really feeling as close as I think I could feel. And then I don't get it even an opportunity to take that emotional risk with that person.
I think that is a great point. And my brain, when you were talking about that, was just saying, like, you know, whether you part ways or whether, I mean, I'm just thinking of all the times I've had a friend, whether a new friend or a past friend, where, you know, they tell me something that they are interested in or they love or whatever. And they tell me that maybe hoping that I will share that interest, but I don't. And the ability to just say, I hope you find people who also love that. Like, I want to encourage you to go find those people, meet those people. When you do meet them, I want to hear about them.
Yeah.
Like, just because I don't want to go to the illustration classes with you doesn't mean I don't want to hear about the people you meet there and the things you're finding out. Like, you can tell me about that, but I don't love that enough to like go sit with you every week for an hour.
Yeah.
But I want to know that about you, and I want you to find people that get that with you.
So beautiful, because it really comes from your sense of self that you're able to do that, right? You're not coming from the place of insecurity and worrying she's going to meet friends and she's going to not want to be your friend anymore. She's going to be upset that you don't want to do it. Like, what you just spoke to is the depth of, I want to know you. I want to know you, and I want to know your experiences in your life. I think that's what we all really long for, is to feel known and seen and met. There's another piece to that too. You know, people will say, there's this like idea that, I'm having a hard time finding the word, so I'm going to kind of talk around it for a moment and we'll see where it goes. But you know, when you go to share something with somebody and that person doesn't receive that well, like they just can't be there for you, there's a way that we then make that personal, sometimes when it was never personal. So I have this story that I'm too much for people. And the too much story is very common. And it's really just the same. It's the opposite side of the not enough story. And they're both kind of two sides of the same coin. And you could go down that path. But the too much story comes from because we have been too much for people. Like another person, parents, siblings, teachers, whatever, have given us the impression that what we're asking for, needing, whatever, is too much. The problem is that we make it about us. So like I would make it about me that that person didn't like what I did or something. And then I think I need to change myself. I need to dim my light. I need to be more quiet, or I need to be careful or whatever. And that's the whole thing that starts to become this chameleon people pleasing, because if I'm too much, then I have to change me.
I had an aha moment in here and I'm waiting to see if we're going to hit the same one. Keep going, keep going. Yeah.
I almost hope not, because I can't wait to hear yours. But so when a person is feeling like they're too much, there are times when it might be that there's actually a mismatch in the relationship. That's possible.
Mm-hmm.
But there's oftentimes just a mismatch in the moment. Like I might go to you and feel that I really want to share something that's really hard for me right now, but you are literally like, I don't have the capacity for this. And you might say to me, I don't have the capacity right now, but I want to. I'm going to get back to you as soon as I do, or something. If I hear it and I take it personally, then I might perceive it that I'm too much, but actually it has nothing to do with me. It has to do with that two people aren't always at the same place at the same time,
Yeah.
you know? And so it feels like that is such a painful place for us to walk around with that story, when it's actually, this is what I want to say about it, is that it's actually true. You could be too much. We always say you're never too much. That's not true. Sometimes you're too much, but not because of you, but because of my capacity being reduced. And it's okay for me to have reduced capacity, and it's okay for you to need something, and it's okay for us not to be able to give that to each other in that moment. And we need permission for that in our relationships.
And we have kind of a similar, my aha moment, because I've never really thought about that. I have also felt like I am too much a lot of my life. When you were talking, what I was realizing is it kind of goes back to that idea that like our friends, our people, our family, our partners, or whatever, they should be able to show up for us in all the ways, all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, keep your circle small. Find those people who get all the parts of you. And we say that, and like, that's just not the reality.
No.
We are too unique, too vast, ever changing. And I'm going to kind of say what you said, but in a different way. It's like, if I'm too much for you, that probably means that this just isn't our shared experience to connect on. And you're right. It is, I am too much for them in that aspect. And I should go find someone else who also loves whatever it is I'm talking about, cooking, or who has a similar experience, or who has capacity to hear about, I don't know, whatever the panic attack I had, but like, that's okay. And I'm realizing as you're talking about that, that in my own personal life, I'm really good at that. I tell people all the time, not that they're too much, but like, I normally say, like, I just can't be your person for this. Like, I love you. I support you. I want you to have somebody to talk about this with. I also need you to know that, like, I am not your person for this. And I want you to find that person. How can I help you find that person? But it's not me, because, you know, maybe I'm not interested in that hobby, or I don't have that personal experience, or I don't have the capacity, or maybe I've listened to them talk about this exact problem 25 times and it's never changed. So like, obviously you need to try something new. But I do this all the time. I will say, like, I'm not your person for this, but I want you to have that person. How can I help you find that person?
How do people receive that?
I mean, I don't think I've ever had a bad reaction to it. I do think it's pretty unique, right? That's not something a lot of people are saying. And it's not that I don't want to. It's not that I don't want to be there for my friend.
Yeah.
And I don't know, let's say that let's use an example here. Let's say that they are having a bunch of work problems, and I don't work in their industry and I don't really understand the nuances here. So I might have listened to them talk about this a number of times, but at a certain point, because I don't really know what to suggest to solve the problem, I don't understand the technicalities here. Like, I'm just really not the right person to help them solve this problem. Like, at a certain point, I want to put that out there, because it's more productive for me, honestly, to get them to think about the other people they could go to that would help them, so they're no longer stuck in this problem, because I don't want them to be stuck in the problem anymore.
Yeah. It's actually really a brave thing. I know people have said, like, I'm not available for this, but I'm available for this. I've heard that type of phrasing. You know what I like about it's truth. And I really believe that we rest when we're in truth. And if you're listening, but inside your head, you're sort of like, oh, I don't really want to be here. I actually think people feel that. And oftentimes it makes us become even more too much because it brings up insecurities in us and all this stuff. And so to have someone tell the truth, I think our shoulders drop and we're like, okay, that might have hurt a tiny bit to imagine that, you're not going to be able to be there in that way for me. But then I get to know the truth instead of living in denial.
The thing is, like you're saying, like, know the truth. I think part of it is just like admitting sometimes like what you're hoping. I think there's different things, right? It's like if somebody just wants to vent and wants me to listen, as long as I, have the capacity and I'm not like super overwhelmed with life or something, like the rare times where that happens, sure, you can vent at me all day. I can tell you I love you, I support you, I whatever. I think that's when people more want like a compadre and an interest that I'm not interested in, or they want help with a solution that I just am not the right person for. Yeah. It's like, okay, well, you could talk at me for a million hours, or we could switch the focus here, which is like, what if I help you find somebody who is the right person?
Yeah.
That's more productive.
Totally.
Because I want you to find the solution.
Yeah.
I can't give it to you.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. I just think you're right. I would just say this. I think a lot of people don't do that. I think there's people pleasing that shows up in many, many dimensions, right? So there's people pleasing also on the person who will listen to someone keep talking about something and then they don't even think of the part that's available, which is, oh my gosh, I could actually be more helpful if I connected you with my friend who actually is in that space and might be able to support you on this. And I like that. I like it. I think it does require a sense of knowing yourself. Like, know yourself well enough. My guess is that internally you have a good barometer for like how it feels in your body when something no longer feels like it's either productive or that you're not being as useful or helpful, or some way that there's a disconnect. And then you're able to tune into that, know it's coming up for you, and then be able to have the presence of mind to be able to know what else can be done. And then the bravery to be able to speak it in a situation. And I think that a lot of those steps, each one requires a little bit of inner strength, layering your inner strength to be able to be brave enough to be your true self.
I would agree with that. I think it's a practice for anybody who's listening to this and like, whoa, I could never do that. I think it's like a baby step. Sure, you may not be able to just like say that to someone right now, but there might be ways you can start being a little more honest and self-assured, and over time get somewhere closer than that. Like, I don't think I just did that. Also, my personality is very direct, so that also helps.
Yeah, it helps. Right.
If that's not your personality.
Right. Well, it is true. And a lot of people, it's maybe not theirs. And I would say that the thing that comes up for me is that what I noticed for me is that the way that I made these changes was because I would be in a situation that I had something come up inside of me, like where I could feel it in my body and something wasn't right. And then afterwards, I reflected on it and said, what happened in that situation? And then I made a decision. I wanted to do something different the next time. So it's often in the moment, it's hard to catch it. But then, as you said, it's a practice. And so from there, once I knew, oh, I don't actually want to do that again, then the next time I might be a little braver. I might even just do a tiny little thing, not even the thing that I ultimately will do, but a tiny little thing. I might ask a different question, or I might do something. And then that brings me more strong and more capable. So, and I believe we are capable of shifting relationships through that, like listening to ourselves. And then I really believe our relationships have a lot of room. There's a lot of room in them, a lot more room for us to be our true selves, a lot more room for us to speak what's really true for us, for allowing the other person and inviting them to speak their truth. I think there's a lot more room for it. It's the fear that's kind of made us feel like I have to be this way and they have to be that way, and it's contained us.
I would agree with that. So you've mentioned, I'm curious about a couple of things. You've mentioned this idea of being like spending a lot of your time as a people pleaser. And I know that you've been actively trying to unwind that, again, what you're saying, like create more space, not feel too much. Tell us a little bit about, I guess, like the journey of trying to unwind that, like realizing that that was your tendency, and then just like you were saying, like actively trying to change it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so you asked me before, like, I have this like complicated relationship with friendships, and it's true. And I want to bring in one other thing that I learned, which was I watched my mother, and the way that my mother was in relationship with other people was that she would be the person who was the listener and the advice giver. And she never shared anything about herself. And she actually prided herself on that nobody knew her. She was like, nobody even knows me. I mean, they don't ever ask me any questions about me. I ask all the questions, and then they just talk, and then I listen, and then I eventually give them advice. And, this is kind of how it goes. And so I watched my mom. She was beloved, but nobody really knew her.
Yeah.
And interestingly, that's what she set up with us. So she was a listener and I was the talker. But what my friendships ended up becoming was that I was the listener and they were the talker, because I was safer. And I realize now in retrospect, it was much safer to be the one that could be the listener, the helper, the savior, the hero, whatever it was. But something shifted. Well, there were two major things that happened. One was when my kids were in preschool and early elementary school, I was around women, groups of women. And I was like, genuinely, I look back, I'm like, I was re-traumatized. Like I was scared to death to be with all these women. And even though I had friends and I liked them and I was chit-chatty with them and I enjoyed it, there was a part of me that was being triggered and was in a fear space and was kind of like, I was like hypervigilant. I was hypervigilantly trying to figure out where I fit into friendships and all that.
Well, what they wanted of you.
And what they wanted of me and what I could do to stay safe. And then let's just add another layer, like, why are my kids not being included to that thing? And there's like all this stuff that was coming up. And I won't go into this now because it would be too long of an episode. But like at that time, that was the beginning of a true midlife crisis for me. I was 39 years old. That was a really big moment for me. And it was only a couple of years later that I was able to see, oh, that was the friendship thing that was even the biggest, most pivotal thing that was shifting in my life. There was a point where I started to notice I didn't have the emotional depth I was longing for in my friendships, really any of my relationships. But it took time for me to understand why. It took time for me to understand that I played a part in the pattern. I thought that I was the one, like, why was I always attracting people who had all these problems and would come and talk to me? Like, why didn't I? And I didn't see what I did in the relationship to create that dynamic. And I will tell you that it really was only in the past year and a half that I feel like I finally shifted that pattern. I kind of shifted the pattern in tiny incremental little steps so I'm 53, so it's over 10 years. I shifted it over those years just a little bit in every interaction. Here's what happened is that I realized what I did and what my part was. And I realized I couldn't really blame another person for what they were doing because we are really just playing out a pattern. So once I saw what my part in the pattern was, I had to have great awareness and commitment to changing myself. And so I remember a particular friendship where I would always give her advice and then she would never take my advice. And then of course I'd go home and complain that I gave her all this great advice and she wouldn't do it. Now I understand that so much better. Like I understand that wasn't ever what she was looking for. However, that's all I knew at that time. So I would never share anything about me. So the first thing I started to do was just share a little tiny bit about me each time that we got together.
I'm going to try and keep what I'm about to say as brief as possible because this could be an entire 3-episode series, honestly, not even 1 episode. So I'm going to distill this down. Like this is not going to feel complete, but I want to point it out here. I promise I'll do an episode about it. Deb says that her mom was beloved for being a good listener, for nobody knowing her, that she actually prided herself on that. that they never asked her any questions, and that they would just talk to her and she would listen. And this is one of those moments where I need to call out that although we could look at Deb's mom and say that that's a her problem, this is actually a societal issue. This is the way women are socialized in a patriarchy, right? Women are socialized to put everyone else first, to absorb, to listen, to be silent, to do all this emotional labor of being there for everyone else at the cost of themselves. Like, this isn't just Deb's mom. This is women, right? We are told that a good woman is kind and caring and thoughtful and listens and is always there for everyone and takes care of everyone. And so you fall into these roles, and it's not necessarily the person. Sometimes it's the bigger societal issue. And just to like really hone this in, to give you one more tangible example, I want you to think about every time somebody talks about their mom and they say things like, oh, my mom always cooked dinner for us and she was always there for us. She always listened to us, right? All the things she does for her children. But when somebody talks about their dad, they say things like, oh, he loved fishing and he could play a practical joke on everyone. Women in our society are celebrated for shutting off their own needs and absorbing everyone else's, for caretaking. And listening is a form of caretaking. It's a form of emotional labor. So if you feel this way, I just want you to know that it might be you, but it might also just be the way that you were socialized. And that sometimes friendships and community and connection are harder, not because we are the problem, but because of the systems that we exist in. I promise I'll go deeper on this, but I just couldn't let that pass by without acknowledging it. Okay, so I have a question.
Yeah.
When you say you never share, would people ask?
Probably. I'd share just a little bit and then I would quickly
switch the
subject to them. I'm like, oh, tell me about, what last time we were together, you were talking about this and what was happening.
Mm-hmm.
Catch me up. And so then they would fulfill their part in the pattern. Yeah. I think they did try to. Maybe sometimes not, but I think they did.
And probably maybe in the beginning when they're trying to get to know you. But I think, yeah, what you're saying, like I can think of people I've met before where you try and after so many times, you're like, well, they're never going to share anything anyway.
Yep.
So
yep,
you just like don't really even ask anymore.
Yeah, because that's the pattern that you've established in the relationship. And I was safer that way. Like there's no question I was safer that way, but it was unfulfilling. So the first thing was sharing more about me. And the second thing was holding my tongue on advice. And so I just practiced. And let me just tell you, if I was in an hour-long conversation with a friend, I probably did it twice. And then 95% of the time I was, doing my old pattern. And then maybe I do a tiny bit more and a tiny bit more. The same thing I did in my relationship with my mother, which was I stopped sharing so much. And I started asking her more questions and she would deflect and I'd get sucked in again. And then I'd go back and ask her again. So I had to hold both sides of it and see both sides and understand how much I didn't like how I felt when I was in relationship with my mother anymore. And how much I didn't like how I was in relationship with my friends, where I was the opposite in each of them, which is kind of wild, right? In some ways, that's really a fascinating place to be able to be, where I was playing both roles in two different relationships or multiple different relationships. But I did actually change the relationships, and my relationships with those people persisted. Well, my mom has since died, but we changed our relationship.
When you were, and I don't know if this lasted into adulthood, like when we were talking about the high school days, maybe this persisted, maybe it didn't. You mentioned that you had a good number of friends and you felt like some of them did know you.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if that was still the same when you were an adult or not. Did the people who you felt like did know you, did they ever comment that it seemed like other people didn't know you? or that you were acting different around certain people, or did they just, let it go?
I'll be honest with you. I think they thought they knew me because I still did share my perspective on their life. You know what I mean? Like they would share what was going on with them, and then I would say, I would give them my perspective. So I think that a lot of times they just didn't even notice that I wasn't, at least not in the moment. I had a couple people who would say to me afterwards, oh, I didn't even know what's going on in your life. Oh, I didn't get caught up on your life. But we also spent a lot of time together. So they kind of knew what was going on in my life just because like we were at school pickup, and they met my kids. And I don't know that they actually felt like they didn't know me, but I knew that I didn't really reveal the matters of my heart to them. I didn't really share what was true for me. And I sometimes think that as an example, like I might have not wanted to listen that day, but I still listened. So I just didn't share what was true. I didn't say something like, I've got a headache and I actually would rather than talk, would you mind if we just like went out and laid on the grass and looked at the clouds or something like that? Like I would have never said anything like that. Now I would share with somebody, I would share what my capacity limitations were. At the time, to be honest with you, I didn't think I had any limitations.
Yeah, I was going to say, like admitting that is not very people-pleasy.
No.
The people-pleasing shows up obviously in so many ways.
Yeah.
The trying to fit in. Like obviously trying to deflect and not talk about yourself, but also not saying how you feel, who you are, like not setting a boundary. There's so many ways that this appears.
Oh, yes.
And, as you were talking about this, I was just thinking over my years, I have been friends with people who are really big people pleasers, I think I can eventually, when you're first getting to know someone, you don't really maybe know. Like they are fun and they're enjoyable and they're part of the group and they're, right, because they're trying to fit in. So, but the longer you get to know someone, at a certain point, I think you can tell that you don't really know them.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've been on that side, realizing that I have somebody I consider really close and I actually don't know if I know them that well.
Yeah.
But, like having so much history with them and caring for them and almost having to admit to yourself, like, this is a person I'm really close with, but I actually don't think I know them very well. But I like hope that they let me in at some point. Mm-hmm. Because if they don't let me in, I don't know who they're going to let in. And that's not that it's special about me, but it's more just like there's history here. I'll say I've been on the opposite side of that before. Mm-hmm. And having friendships where I'm just like, this is truly somebody I'm close with. And yet I almost have to admit to myself, I don't know if I really know the real them.
Yeah.
Not for lack of trying.
Yeah. Well, you probably don't.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's not that uncommon for a lot of relationships, that we know them in the ways that they reveal to us. And even some people who reveal a lot to us, we still don't know all of them. There are times when I know a lot about a person in one capacity, but maybe I don't know a lot about them in another capacity. And so I think that the more that we bring attention to relationships like this and we talk about them, the more that we are able to see the patterns, see how we can be on, either side of the pattern in different relationships, and be honest about what we really want. And then in some ways lead the way on that because, I'm here having just moved and I listened to your podcast episode that was about the importance of integrating a person into your life, not just going out to dinner.
Yeah.
Because in that situation, you really do just see a snapshot of them. You don't see what happens when they get hangry. You don't get to like giggle about their, the clothes they put on that look so that you're like, oh my God, no, that is not the right fit for you. Or
the fact that their house is a disaster, the fact that they burnt dinner. Yeah.
You don't get to know those things. And so you don't actually have this shared experience. I think that's what you talked about, right? Like a shared experience. And I feel like not everything has to be conversational. Not everything has to be, have I told you all the things? Have I updated you everything on my life? Oftentimes, people will update you on everything in their life and you still don't know them because you don't know some of those little quirky things. And you also don't know the matters of their heart. They might tell you what they cooked for dinner and what their kids are up to in the latest update on their, their job or whatever. But do you know what makes them awake at night with worry? Do you know what mistake they made at work today that they're carrying shame about? That's kind of what I want to know about it. I don't need to know all of that, but I need to know the things you're willing to say. And then I also want to know you in your life. I want to have those shared experiences so that I can know you beyond words.
And that's some of the, I guess, like the deeper stuff, but I also want to call out like the simpler stuff that you would learn on your way to learning that stuff, which is like when you let someone into your life a little bit, and it's not just like you go and you sit at a restaurant and you fill each other in and you discuss the menu where the people pleaser then says, I like anything, you order what you want. There's something to be said about, if you let someone, if I came to your house right now and I walked around and let's say I opened your fridge, I would see the types of brands you like to buy. I might find out if there are allergies in your house. I might learn that there's like leftovers from, I don't know, Indian food in there. And that then opens so many doors for me to ask like, oh, did you cook that? Did you order that? Oh, you've traveled there. Oh, you just mentioned to me before, like your kids are coming home for the weekend. Then you could be like, oh, well, I don't normally buy X, Y, and Z, but my kids are coming home and they love that. And it's like a nostalgic meal. There's so many visual cues about like being in someone's space where we learn so much, or doing an activity together. A friend I've had for a long time, but definitely has been like a get coffee friend, work friend. I mean, people know her, Sheena Calzo. She's my illustrator. She's on my team. We went on a work retreat and we went grocery shopping together. And we were laughing because I learned how much coffee she drinks. And she learned that I can drink iced tea all day and what we eat for breakfast most days. And like that had so much depth to a person just by walking through and seeing what somebody picks up off the shelf.
Yes, because what we learn though, see, this is the thing. It's the humanizing aspect because what we do otherwise is our crazy little minds make up a story about that person of being like maybe more perfect than they really are. Like you might open up a person's refrigerator and be like, oh, good. I'm glad to see you don't eat as clean as I thought you ate. And you might feel relief. It's like a humbling thing, or when you go to somebody's house and they're kind of spontaneously-ish and you do see their messy or house, you start to go, oh God, thank God. I'm so glad that you're human, and that you're not as perfect as my crazy brain was making you out to be. And I was starting to feel inferior. So it's this way that we start to realize, oh my gosh, we really are all humans. We really are. We really do. We all poop and we all say that we eat healthier than we do. We all leave our flip-flops underneath the coffee table and end up with 6 pair and wonder why I never put them away those prior 6 nights. Like those things happen. I mean, those are just examples, but you know what I'm saying. And that's connecting, I think.
And the joy of that is like, for all the people out here listening, worried about, fitting in or belonging or controlling this vision of who you are, I understand that it's a big hurdle to like let someone in some way. And if letting somebody into your house maybe feels like too much, again, like go to the grocery store. It's a more neutral space, but you are who you are there. Sure, you could deep clean your house or whatever, like make your fridge look whatever. But for the most part, you're probably not going to. And that, I think, is a way, without having to talk, without having to filter your words, without having to anticipate, like just let somebody come in and observe. Because more often than not, somebody's going to come in and look for the similarities or what they're curious about than they are trying to, tear you apart. They're going to walk in and be like, oh, I also have that coffee maker.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's so simple, but there's something to that Where like we get so caught up in talking and sharing and verbalizing and planning our words. Like most of the time people are looking for similarities. And if you just let them in a little bit, they'll find them.
I totally agree. And so then the question is, well, how do we let a person in? And that is the part, it's bravery and emotional risks, right? How do we become more brave and willing to take emotional risks? You know what I think? I think there's a point where we're sick and tired of superficial relationships. And that might be the catalyst for it. Like, you know what? I'm kind of done. I don't really want that. How can I take a step toward something deeper and take the baby steps?
The other thing I like to remind people is like, if you are this person who's trying to control it all and fitting in it, like we talked about at the beginning, fitting in is a lot of work.
Mm-hmm.
Doing all that analyzing is so much work that you are doing, but it's what you're used to doing. So it's comfortable to do what you're used to doing, even if it's an extreme amount of work. You can choose to do a different kind of work, which is to be uncomfortable and let people in a little bit and have to navigate your discomfort. Like that is also a lot of work. And over time, that can become something you're more comfortable with.
Yeah.
So just reminding people, like either way you're doing work, I'm not saying one is right or one is wrong, but which one leads you to the outcome you want?
Yeah, that's exactly it. It's really about what do you want to create? And then what are you willing to do to get there? And I love the things you're talking about the more simple things, because even something like what you said, like you go to a restaurant and you're like, oh, just pick whatever. I don't really care. But even choosing the place you're going to go, like, you know, if you tend to be the person who says, well, where do you want to go? What's your favorite place or whatever? And then you go to that place, like this time say, I made a reservation for such and such place. Or you, even if you don't feel that bold, you just say, what do you think about this place? And you start to just insert your opinion a little bit more. Or if you're a person who inserts your opinion all the time, then you might insert your opinion less. And so this is why the balance of this, like, I don't want to give the impression like this is great for people pleasers, but there are also people on the other side of the people pleasing relationship. And those people can start to do things like notice that you're always there. You're always doing the thing that you want to do because you've gotten into that pattern, and sometimes invite them to say, you know, what's a place you've been to recently, or you want to go to the movies? Well, what movie have you wanted to see? And start to invite that in, and then even push them. Last night, I went out with a new friend. She ended up getting dropped off. She has teenage kids and they didn't have enough cars or whatever. So she ended up getting dropped off at the place we were going to. And then I said, well, how are you getting home? She said, oh, my husband will pick me up. And so then I said, well, why don't I just drop you off?
And there's some vulnerability in that. It's such a simple act, but now she's in your car. You know where she lives. Yes.
Right. And so she said no 3 times. And I said to her, you know, I know you don't want to do this for some reason. I don't fully understand why. I'm happy to hear why, but I also want you to know, I think this would be an edge for both of us, for me to push you a little harder instead of just being like, okay, you don't want to. And for you to maybe do something different than you normally would do. And so she did. She said, okay, just because we're trying so hard to create a relationship that really does have this vulnerability, I will. And
I love that. And it's so simple.
Exactly. It's okay. So the depth piece is a piece of it because we do long for that emotional depth, but it does start with the tiny little moments that are missed opportunities to connect because it's just the pattern or the easier thing to do. And I did it for a lot of years and I had a lot of friends. Believe me, I want you to know, it's not like I didn't have a lot of friends, but I did this for so many years. And the energy that it took me to do the people pleasing and be a chameleon was far greater than the energy it takes me to, now that I've broken through the pattern, to just be a friend, and to be the person who's willing to share the thing that I'm scared of, or to whatever it is, to suggest something. But I blew up 2 relationships in a big way 2 years ago that were my fault to be honest with you, because of my people pleasing and my hero complex.
Okay. Well, you got to tell us a little bit about it. Tell us about one of them.
Okay. I'll give you a little, like a nugget. I have no problem sharing it. I'm just the nugget that came up for me In one of the relationships, I was just the fixer. She only came to me when she had a problem. And I just immediately, I wanted her friendship so much that I would come in and no matter what I was doing, I would drop everything and my life would kind of shift toward her. And then but I would be in that fix it mode, helping her to solve her problems. And then she would drop off the face of the earth. And then I would resent that. And so there was this pattern like that. And basically I thought it was her. I thought she was the problem. But I do see what I was doing that was really causing harm. And that was just a brief one on that one. The other one was deeply entrenched people pleasing. And the problem was that over the course of a couple of years of being this person's friend, I knew her wounding was that she didn't feel like she was accepted. And I decided I wanted to be the person that unconditionally accepted her. The problem is that by doing that, I really did abandon myself. And I didn't think she could handle my truth, but turns out I think I was afraid of how she would react if I did speak my truth. So I thought it was her, but I think it was really deep down, it was me. And I was afraid of that she would react and not like me or be mad at me. So I would do things I didn't want to do, or I would dance around it. So an example was she was a really good bike rider and she could ride up hills really well and I couldn't. So I would usually have excuses about it, or I would go, but then I wouldn't really want to go. And then I would not tell her I didn't really want to go. So take that and then imagine that there were 10 of those, that I was playing out these patterns over and over again, going to do hiking, but then going to the trail she wanted, but then really kind of wishing that we went on a different trail, or I didn't always have to go to her place to go to the thing or whatever, but I wasn't sharing these things. Well, at one point I sent her an email, and it was this email that I thought was so loving. I took total responsibility for it, but I made a list of 10 things. It's a little too much just for anyone just in case you're wondering, it's too many.
But you had a lot to get off your chest.
I did really take responsibility, but I basically said to her, I've been lying to you for 2 years. I mean, I didn't quite say that, but I kind of said that. And, in her mind, there was no way back from that. And it was far more complex. So don't get me wrong. She had her part. I am not taking full responsibility. We were both 100% responsible for the patterns. And all I can own is mine. I caused damage to that relationship by my part of that pattern. And when I tried to repair it through taking responsibility, it was she was like, well, who are you?
Yeah.
And how can I ever trust you again? Because you didn't tell me the truth. And I thought I was doing this kind service by not telling my whole truth. Ugh. I could feel it in my body as I'm telling you about how painful it was for me to abandon myself so deeply, and how much I cannot do that anymore.
It's interesting. I have this whole roots theory that I talk about with how we build connections. So you're talking about the shared experiences. There's 3 types of roots: shared experience, emotional intimacy, and story roots. And it's as if you think of your friendship with this person as a tree, and all the roots at the bottom are this stuff that you've built, that about each other, that you enjoy doing together, the beliefs that you have, the memories, the history, you built all this stuff, right? And as you're talking about that, I was thinking, and I hadn't really thought about this honestly until you just said it, but when you're people pleasing like that, she's right, she doesn't know all the roots you built, which are real and which are fake. And it's almost like you just dug up the soil and put a little bomb down there and exploded all the roots, and you're just I don't even know where we go from here. Because even at that point, if it's so many roots, it's well, you could try and find new things that are not biking, that are not hiking to do together, but then the details that about each other, which ones are real and which ones aren't. So she's going to suggest walking. She's probably hesitant to even suggest it, because she's well, although you said you kind of liked this, do you?
Exactly.
And then you just don't even know where to go.
Yeah.
And sometimes people can agree to kind of start over, but then that's obviously hard because you do know things about the other person. But do you?
I know. It was hard for me to admit that people pleasing is a bit of a betrayal. the first betrayal is to ourselves. And so that's the work, is to realize, well, why do we people please? Like, why did I? What was I afraid of? How does it serve me to people please? Because we believe that we're people pleasing because we want to make the other people happy. But deep down inside, what we don't want is to feel their disappointment, their disapproval, their being upset with us. We don't want the conflict.
We're trying to control the outcome.
We're trying to control the outcome, period. End of story. And so we would rather be performing the act of being who we think they need us to be, and this chameleon, rather than really reveal who we are and take that risk. And, when that friendship, actually, the thing that caused me to write the email was that I did speak my truth. I can remember I'm on a bike on a trail and I spoke truth to her on something. And she did exactly what I was worried she would do. She said, I don't know if I can trust you if you don't accept that in me. That was exactly the thing that I was afraid of, is that if I didn't accept everything about her and I shared with something that I disagreed, that she would then be upset with me. So I was in a no-win situation either, because if I did stand up for myself, she couldn't accept me, or she couldn't trust me. And if I didn't, she couldn't trust me. So there are times when you were actually at that point in a crossroads in a relationship, and that was okay. And not that I don't grieve it, but I only can own my part still. And so the healing had to come from me to be brave enough to be me, and to risk early enough in the relationship to allow some relationships not to work.
I mean, that's what I was going to say, is like, when you're saying you're in a no-win situation, and you obviously learned everything is worth doing, you learned whatever, but, had you done this earlier, you could have realized earlier
Totally
that it was a no-win situation, and it probably would have never kept going. It probably would have naturally fizzled.
Yep.
Now, if probably was a great person and you enjoyed your time with them, and no regrets, but yeah, that is the risk you run by being more yourself. Like, they're not all going to work out.
Right. And it circles right back to the beginning of the fitting in versus the belonging. And ultimately what we all really want is to belong, not to morph ourselves to fit in. But to do that, we do have to be willing to allow some friendships to fall away. It's like dating when you're first meeting people. It really is like dating, because some people will date and want multiple relationships, but your friendships, you'll probably have multiple friendships, and you're dating with this idea of finding the one. And so it's a little different. But in this case, I feel like when you do meet someone new, it's like, lay it on the table. You know what I mean? Like, just be you, and then let's just see where it goes. And it's okay, because you haven't even invested anything in them yet. You haven't even invested in the relationship yet. So let's just be ourselves and then figure it out and be okay with that. Not everybody's for everybody.
Not everyone's for everybody, and they don't have to be all the things. Like, that's the joy about friendship. You're right, it's like dating, but I like to say it's a lot less pressure.
Yeah.
Like, we need to let go of this idea that our friends need to be all encompassing. And if we can accept that, then we can just see if there's places where this person fits and you fit in their life. And if so, great. And if not, all right, I'll go meet some new people. And I hope they find what they need, but it's just not me.
Yeah, totally.
Deb, I think this has been such a rich episode. It's not a magazine, it's a podcast. I'm really excited for people to hear this. I think we went a lot of places I wanted to go and just haven't gotten around to on the podcast. Deb, thanks again for being here. I really appreciate your vulnerability and your willingness to share. I think a lot of people are going to feel seen in this episode. I really do.
Well, thank you. It's been really great.
I think we might all need a deep breath. And I say that in the best way possible. This one was a doozy. This one was full of so many gems. I'm going to need to go back and listen to this episode a couple times. Not because necessarily I need to absorb it, but because I just can't believe Deb and I covered so many things in one episode. There was a lot in here. So if you feel that way, I would understand why. I want to thank Deb for her vulnerability in coming on here. Hearing people's stories, I think, makes all the difference. We can talk about this stuff in theory, but actually hearing these stories, like the bike story Deb shared, really stands out to me. I will never forget that story. And I'm sure that there are many people listening that you might relate on some level to getting deep into a friendship, only to realize you'd kind of abandoned yourself the entire way and you didn't know how to still dig yourself out of the hole. We've been there. I've been there. I do want to point out that towards the end of the episode, when we really talked about this idea of kind of trying to control the outcome, I have an entire podcast episode, episode 15, about managing differences, where I talk all about this. If you want to dive deeper, go listen to episode 15. And with that, I will see you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of Friendship IRL. I am so honored to have these conversations with you, but don't let the chat die here. Send me a voice message. I created a special website just to chat with you. You can find it at alex.chat. You can also find me on Instagram. My handle at it's Alex Alexander, or go ahead and leave a review wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. Now, if you want to take this conversation a step further, send this episode to a friend. Tell them you found it interesting and use what we just talked about as a conversation starter the next time you and your friend hang out. No need for a teary goodbye. I'll be back with a new episode next week.